by the United States of America. It was not created by bigoted Americans, and it was certainly not created by Cuban Americans or anybody who left the islands because they were getting abused. The problem was created by a government that is abusive, authoritarian, and dictatorial. So that's my first disclaimer. The second thing I'm going to say, so that I pull the pin on the grenade and throw it here, is I am a Democrat. I like Barack Obama. And I disagree with my two colleagues. So that should get the juices. Now, when we talk about Cuba, we need to understand something, and I think we picked it up in both of these presentations, which were fantastic. When you talk about Cuba, you don't talk about rationality. You talk about emotion. You talk about feeling. And the thing that the three of us share as we present this is a profoundly emotional topic. And I have to confess to you that I came here tonight under false pretenses. I am not going to do a legal analysis. I am not going to do a rational outline of the decisions. I am going to talk to you about ultimately a policy, ethical, and human and moral problem. And as my students, thank you for coming, by the way, who are sitting in the back of the room, I love you. I will tell you, I never give an answer. I am going to ask a lot of very difficult questions that I want you to think about and that hopefully will stimulate the conversation. I did a little bit of research before coming here. The first thing I'm going to throw out another provocative statement. There's a famous saying, for those of you who know Mexico, a famous Mexican author once said, "Pobre México, tan lejos de Dios y tan cerca de los Estados Unidos." Poor Mexico, so far away from God, so close to the United States. Take the word Mexico out, put Cuba. And if you know anything about Cuban history, and if you feel as a Cuban, you know that we love America, you know that we love Americans, but you know that we have had a difficult relationship with the United States of America because of the specific weight, the gravitational pull, if you will, if you want to talk about it in physics terms, that the United States has exerted on Cuba way before 1895, and way past 2014. And that is what we have to analyze here tonight. I looked up some numbers, and I was hearing some of these wonderful arguments that were being made. There are 142,000 Syrians in the United States of America. There are 174,000 Venezuelans in the United States. And there are 700,000 Russians in the United States. So the first set of questions I want to ask of the audience, and hopefully we'll get to discuss them, is it the obligation of the United States of America to give refuge to every nationality that suffers from a really bad government? And notwithstanding what we see printed at the foot of the Statue of Liberty, I would posit to you that it is not. Number one. Number two, sorry, I just breached my first commitment that I wasn't going to give you an answer. I gave you an answer. But I am a Cuban, and as we Cubans say, me contradijo y qué. Question number two, then. Is it then that the United States of America is an open place of refuge only for Cubans? We got a good deal. We heard from one of my colleagues that we may be getting 2 bites of the apple. We're not getting 2 bites of the apple. We're getting the apple pie a la mode. We get what nobody else gets. A year and a day after we set foot here, dry foot, under certain circumstances, unless you're a murderer, you get to apply for residency. That's a hell of a deal. People would kill you on the streets of Damascus for that kind of deal. We have that deal. The question is, why do we have that deal? Is that deal the payback of the United States of America for what happened in the early morning hours of April 17, 1961, when we were left on the beach? Or is it the payback for what happened in the first 2 weeks of October 1963, when the United States cut a deal with the then Soviet Union that has guaranteed the continuation of that horrific government for all these years of nightmare? Is this the payback? Is this the blood money that the United States has given us, and from which, I will confess, I didn't benefit because I was a little kid, but a lot of people that I know benefit from it, and I'm sure a lot of the people in the audience have benefited from it. Is it that the United States is paying a debt of honor to the Cubans? When we look around the world today, it's a mess. I get the New York Times, but I don't read it anymore because they're doing this in-depth analysis of ISIS, and I get depressed. I get profoundly depressed. Because it is incomprehensible to me that in this day and age, people are acting the way they're acting. They're also doing a piece on Vladimir Putin. And it is incomprehensible to me that he kicked the can over in Europe and has unleashed the nightmare that Europe lived in 1933 all over again. It is incomprehensible to me that we have Ebola in Africa and we seem to be incapable of containing it for the benefit of the human race. All those things are incomprehensible to me. But the Cuban Adjustment Act is profoundly comprehensible to me because I am a Cuban. I was born in Cuba and I am now an American. So I am this hybrid. I'm like a hybrid. I'm like a Toyota Prius. I am part electric and part gas. And part of me is profoundly rational, and part of me is absolutely emotional, the Cuban side. To understand Cuba and to understand the problem that faces it with the Cuban Adjustment Act, you have to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez. And Gabriel Garcia Marquez, in one of his novels, has the birds flying backwards and it rains up. If you go to Cuba and you walk down the streets of Cuba, you will see birds flying backwards and it will be raining up. Cuba is a very strange place. Cuban Americans, I can say this because I'm one of them, if anybody else says it, I'll be offended and insulted. We are very peculiar people. We are all profoundly traumatized. And my generation, which I share with my colleagues, and with my dear friend, are the last of the Mohicans. When we die, the living memory of the Cuban Republic will die. The living memory of the Cuban Republic will die with us. And that is a very heavy burden that we carry. And I see that burden being carried by our legislators. And I find myself being a liberal, flaming Democrat, oddly agreeing with Lincoln Díaz-Balart and Ileana Ros-Levi and Menendez, and God forbid, with Cruz. Because I am a Cuban American and I understand that deep, deep trauma that we have suffered and we are stuck in the Straits of Florida. We're somewhere in between. So my next level of analysis and my next set of questions is how you analyze this, and I loved your Pareto analysis of the 4 things and the utilitarian, they were fantastic. I'm going to put it in a little bit of a different perspective. And I'm going to ask the people in the audience who are of Cuban descent, who were either born in Cuba or born here of Cuban parents, to ask yourself these questions. When you look at the Cuban Adjustment Act and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, are you a Cuban? Are you a Cuban American? Or are you an American? Because depending upon which hat you put on, and I will tell you that I am the first that I move between those 3 hats at any given moment. If I'm in Versalles, I am profoundly Cuban. If I am writing an essay for the Miami Herald, then maybe I'm a Cuban American, and I am the hybrid engine kicks in. If I am representing one of my clients before the Office of Foreign Assets Control, I am 100% true blue, Yankee Doodle, all-American. And I am totally rational. But I jump between those three, and I suspect that a lot of you jump between those three. And when we look at this issue, we have to be very, very clear. My son, who is my conscience, always tells me, Dad, lie to whoever you want to, but do not lie to yourself. And when we look at this, we cannot lie to ourselves. And let us look at this from the 3 points of view. Is the Cuban Adjustment Act a good thing for Cuba? My answer is no. It is not a good thing for Cuba. Why is it not a good thing for Cuba? Because of the perverse effect. Because the perverse effect is when you go down the streets of Havana, as I went back after 50 years, and you ask a kid, what do you want to be when you grow up? They will tell you, un extranjero. Un extranjero. La patria de Martí. Yo quiero ser un extranjero. ¿Qué le pasó a Cuba? What happened to Cuba? What have we done to ourselves? And I mean all of us, the nation, the Cuban nation, that we have created a set of circumstances that makes little kids say, I don't want to be un habanero, o un camagüeyano, o un oriental, o un médico, o un doctor, o un ingeniero, o un arquitecto. No, yo quiero ser un extranjero. I want to get the hell out of here. I want to get the hell out of here. Yo quiero irme para la Yuma. A la Yuma. We're in la Yuma. We're doing okay. We're all right. We're okay. But we left that behind for very complicated reasons. And let me tell you, I am the first one to say that my parents, my father and my mother, saved me. They saved me. When I went back to Havana and I went to see my house, which by the way now is occupied by none other than Mongo Castro, Fidel's older brother. I was walking around the block and I see this man looking very dilapidated. He's looking at me and he comes over to me and he says, "Tú eres uno de los freires." You're one of the freires. I go, "Yes." "Tú eres el más chiquito." "Yeah, I'm the youngest." I go, "Yo soy fulano de tal." He gives me this great Cuban name. Menendez de no sé qué cosa. And I go, "Oh, okay." I said, "No, I lived across the street. I used to play with your brother." And he goes, "Look at me now." The guy looked like hell. He looked like hell. He said, "Me quedé atrapado. Me quedé atrapado." He was trapped. He couldn't go out. He couldn't get the benefit of the Cuban system. This is the reality that we face. So for Cuba and for the United States, for us to incentivize, as Americans and as Cuban Americans, for people to leave that place, which is hell. It is a very beautiful tropical hell with the sweetest people in the world, one of the worst friggin' governments I've ever seen. And for us to incentivize those people to leave just like we left, it's not the right thing to do. And I know what you're saying, that it is very difficult for me to stand up here and say, I'm here, got my nice suit, got my nice car, got my nice job, my children and grandchildren are doing well. Shut the door. Shut the door and let them stew in their own juice. Let them fix that mess that we have been making for generations. It's very tough for me to say. But at the end of the day, I have raised 5 children. And I will tell you that there is a moment for tough love. There is a moment for tough love. And I think that moment has arrived. And that moment is cut of whole cloth. And I agree with another concept here, which is, it's cut of the whole cloth of the embargo. We cannot sustain a policy that makes it tough for people to live, although it's not the fault of the embargo that Cuba is a mess. Let's be clear about that. It's the fault of the Cuban government. But we certainly are not helping with the policies of the embargo. We don't make it any easier. We cannot sustain a policy that says, we will continue that, but then we're going to have a relief valve. And when you're feeling really, really bad, instead of you working to reconstruct your country, you can leave and come on over here a la Yuma. And we're going to set it up so that you get on a raft and risk your life and come all the way over here. I'm sorry. That's a tough one. I have a lot of problems with it. So then comes the analysis as a Cuban American. As a Cuban American, is this a good policy or not? And I think you nailed it. It is and it is not. Because if you're on my side of the aisle, it's a great thing because the demographics are flowing in our direction. And eventually, the late arrivals will become Democrats, they will register to vote, and my party will be swept into power. If you are a Republican, it's a terrible thing because demographics are swinging and they will come and da-da-da-da-da. But at the end of the day, it's a good thing for Cuban Americans because they are swelling our numbers. And we are now over 1 million, those who came over and those that have been born over here. So we want to get bigger numbers. We want to get bigger numbers. So for Cuban Americans, and then of course there is closing the door behind us. It's extremely difficult for a Cuban American to say, I'm here, I'm good, estoy comiendo arroz con picadillo. You gotta, te tienen que comer el cable. You know, extremely difficult for us to say. And then I'm going to put my Yankee Doodle hat and say, as an American, is this a good idea or not? And there I come up with a mixed verdict. And I will tell you why. Since I am not from the Tea Party, I will tell you that I like immigrants. I like immigrants. I like immigrants a lot. This is a nation of immigrants. The strength of this nation is the immigrants. And I think that as a group of immigrants, Cuban Americans have been nothing short of spectacular. So this is where we do a little bit of chest thumping. I'm very happy, I'm very proud of who I am. And I think we've done pretty darn well, given the circumstances. I think you would agree with me. So, as an American, I see that and I go, this is not a bad bunch of people to have here. And there's an enclave, and they take care of each other. Right? Los cubanos nos ayudamos. So we take care of the family. Llegó la familia. You know, I remember when we arrived here, 21 people in one house. And when somebody else arrived from Cuba, I went to sleep in the porch. You know, because I was the youngest. They'd throw me out. They'd give me an extra blanket for the cold. And that was in the cold. And I went to sopa. Okay? And so we made our way. So we have been a good experience for Americans. So as an American, I say, maybe it's a good idea. Maybe good. But also as an American, I say, yeah, but this carries a heavy social cost. They get all kinds of aid for dependent children and other kinds of benefits. And it sets the wrong example, and then what are we going to do with the Syrians, and what are we going to do with the North Koreans, and what are we going to do with the Iraqis, and what are we going to do with the Afghans? If every time we fail at nation building, we have to give people special status before you know it, we're going to have to take in half of the world. So that's kind of the pro and the con of the American thing. So I will close with this, and I hope I got the juices flowing, and I got everybody excited, and we can have a great and lively debate. It's a very difficult topic, and as my colleagues were saying, the more I thought about it, the more I looked at it, it was like a little tiramisu. It's a tiramisu, because on one level I'm going, yeah, absolutely, this makes absolutely no sense, and then I think about it and go, yeah, but at the end of the day, you know, we're here thanks to that, and this is a magnificent country, and look at how well we've done, and why should I shut the door, and why am I being so self-centered? It's a tough issue. It's a tough issue. And it is not a legal issue. It is not a legal issue. It's an ethical issue, it's a moral issue, and it's an issue of the heart. Thank you very much.
Wow. As I said, I didn't know what they were going to say. So let me very quickly make sure that I got it right. On this side, you guys are for the status quo. You want to maintain the status quo. On this side, repeal. Complete repeal, not reform.
Why not?
Repeal.
I love it.
Now we know where everybody stands.
Well, could we possibly have a moment to sort of rebut or relate?
Oh, you will have. You will have. That's what we're going to do now. But before I do that, I just want to set some basic rules of the game. We have a large room. There's a lot of people. This is a fascinating, emotional topic. So I beg you to please ask one question, do not make a speech, because they are here for the speeches, you are here for the questions. So we facilitate that more people can answer, can ask their questions. Also, our apologies, we don't have a microphone, so you have to stand up and speak loudly. Fortunately, the acoustics in the room will help. And before we move to that, I want to use my privilege as the moderator and ask the entire panel to analyze the results of the question about the Cuban Adjustment Act in the FIU, the recent FIU poll that was published in June, where we got a not surprising result that 86% of all people who were asked this question were in favor, absolutely, or strongly in favor. However, there's a small percentage of people that were not in favor of the law. And this is my question. Most of the people that were not happy with the law are concentrated in two very distinctive groups that can be folded into one. They are the most early arrivals into the United States, the first group that benefited from the Cuban Adjustment Act. Some people call them the traditional exile group. And the other, again, they overlap, is those who are 65 years old or older. That's where we found most opposition to the law. When you go to younger people, recent arrivals, they all are in favor. You can understand that. You left the cousin behind, you left the sister behind, you want to bring them over, so you want to keep the law. Now, I want the panelists to very briefly analyze what I just said. How can you explain that the people who benefited from the Cuban Adjustment Act at the very beginning are now those who oppose it? Not overwhelmingly, but the bigger resistance is in that particular group. Go ahead.
Well, actually, this relates to one of the things I wanted to say. I wanted to associate myself with a lot of what Pedro said, not some of the conclusions, but where he's coming from, this rounded being, and then associate with that. I think part of what explains that is your idea of the politics of emotion. And Cuban Americans are stuck in loss. I mean, we have unresolved trauma that has gone on for 50 years. And I think that explains the illogic of that. And I think there's a sense in which Miami institutions, and I include the Miami Herald and the University of Miami in part of their programming, they've played to this emotional trauma in the community, and in a way they've infantilized the Cuban American community, because emotions don't justify using public policy to resolve your emotional conflict, because that's not what public policy is for. There are other ways of resolving emotional conflicts. And so I think there's a way that the local institutions, academic institutions, do, and I mean, they have provided something, and I do think UM is guilty of this, what I think of as exile infotainment. And what they do is it's like they alienize the Cuban American, in terms of alien, poking them and making them crazy all the time. Maybe because that's a good business model for funding. But I think there's a role for institutions to manage the loss associated with that.
I think that if you have three, you mentioned that you were opposed to or did not agree with. If you have three lawyers, you definitely have three different positions. If you have three Cubans, you have 27 positions. Because you have their cousins, and then the lady at the coffee shop on the corner who said that her cousin said, and obviously, and so I think that there's this misperception that Cubans have ever been a monolithic force. It's interesting because there are functions, but one of the funny things is that really we're not. It is impossible to sit down with your cousins and your family and you'll discover that no one agrees on anything, including whether the rice is white, if it's white. See what I'm saying? So let's just accept that I have no problem with the emotional part because it really, I understand the concept of trauma and such, but the greatest thing that scares me is ignorance, not just at the level of the elderly, because there are people who have chosen to stop learning, who have chosen to stop knowing each other. It's sort of, I suffered, and my suffering is the suffering, and so your suffering is less. And we can't say that because not all the elderly have stopped. So we can't monolize this group either. But at the youth, one of the things that scares me is the complete ignorance of what the issues are. But I see that across the board in terms of people who sort of get their news from Yahoo News. Oh my God, I'm sorry, one of my heroes is here. She smuggled more Cubans. I'm kidding. I did not say that. Is there a lawyer in the room? Thank, oh my God. So, yes, so he's incognito. One of the things that's amazing is walk around and find the level of ignorance. People who do not know the details of what is happening here, what is happening, I mean, and I call it the gym mentality. That people sort of think, about themselves, about the clothes they buy, about their career, about their goals, about their whatever, there. And the thing is, though, that I was speaking to this young Cuban woman here, and this always, I have this need to ask people who are strangers questions. And one of the things that scared me was that she's an American, and her father happened to have been a political prisoner. And now I can understand that maybe the dynamics in the house would not have invited conversation. But one of the interesting things is that she had no idea about the terms that I was speaking about. She had no idea about something as simple as the comida de la defensa, she had nothing, no sense. And then here, this is a person whose main goal was to, in her own words, was, I'm going to be a business attorney, I don't need to know these things. And he said, you do. Because your life will be so much less if you know it. And all of our collective lives will be so much less if we don't sort of somehow force young people to learn. And not just about the Cuban issue, because Cuban suffering is not unique. Suffering is suffering. Whether it's Haitian suffering or Dominican suffering. Go across at the Canal Bona and see the human suffering that goes on in terms of trying to find opportunity in Puerto Rico. And is that not suffering? If a child in Honduras is being held with a gun to their head because I want you to pay the gang tax, is that not suffering? I'm sitting in court with an 8-year-old. Do you think an 8-year-old is going to be able to explain, oh, I am afraid of being persecuted in Honduras, and because based on my political opinion, I have an 8-year-old. He doesn't have it. Well, he has many opinions, but not a political one. And the thing is, what are we supposed to do? We are supposed to educate. If there's one thing that we have as an obligation to educate the elder, and to educate ourselves, and to educate those who will follow us. Because if not, you're right, the memory of the Republic, including the Roman Republic, will be gone because we have no idea.
I am a firm believer in myths. Myths are what gives us a sense of meaning and purpose in life. I used to be chairman of a group called Facts About Cuban Exiles. And the name itself says it all. Facts About Cuban Exiles. And it was founded by a group of wonderful people in Miami in the aftermath of the Mariel boat trip and all the bad things that happened in Miami and Scarface and the image of Cubans as gangsters and so forth. The myth of exile is the foundational myth of Cuban Americans. When we get up in the morning, or certainly some of us, and I am just a little bit over 65, when you get up in the morning and you look in the mirror, you go, soy un exiliado cubano. And that you know who you are. Yo soy un exiliado cubano. And the myth of exile gives you this wonderful sense of purity. When I went back to Cuba in the year 2002, I did not tell my old mother because she would have spanked me across the face. I did not tell my brother, who had been a prisoner because of the Bay of Pigs. He had been captured in the Bay of Pigs. And I did not tell my sister, who was a widow, because her husband asphyxiated to death in La Rasca after the Bay of Pigs. I did not tell those three people that I love very deeply. But I did go back. Because as you're saying, I needed to learn something. And notwithstanding that that was my foundational myth, that is what gave me a sense of purpose and meaning and belonging, that I was pure, that my family had suffered as they suffered, and had left everything behind to give me the wonderful freedom that I have in this country. I had to go back there, and I had to see, and I had to touch, and I had to, like St. Thomas, put my hand in the scar that is Cuba, so that I could see it, and thus unwind that myth and that trauma, which I haven't managed to do completely. But I will tell you this, I am no longer an exile. I cannot claim that title. My father was an exile. My mother died an exile. My brother, who fought in the Bay of Pigs, is definitely an exile. I am no longer an exile. I am something else. I'm not sure what. I'm a Cuban American. I'm definitely an American. Y soy un poco cubano. When I went back to Cuba and I spent a little bit of time there, I realized that I was born there and I love it, and it is one of the most gloriously beautiful places that I've ever been. But I am no longer of that place. I care for it. I want all that is best for it. But I am now of this place. As somebody called it, La República de mi Alma. And I think that, to answer your question, and I've gone a long way about it, I think it's because of that purity, because of that foundational myth, that those of us who have gone to the nether side of 65 perhaps view, perhaps a little unfairly and a little selfishly, that there is that purity in the law that protects people that are fleeing tyranny, and the perception is, rightly or wrongly, that many people who come here now are not fleeing tyranny. They're doing something quintessentially American. They're seeking a better life. Period. Full stop.
Now, let's take questions. Please put your hand with it.
Yes, I
Please stand up so we can hear you better. Thank
the
you.
question is actually from the panelist. He spoke about Cuba being ready to experience tough love. And I wanted to know, why do you think now would be the time? And if it were applied by implementing the Cuban Adjustment Act, do you think the country would experience more bloodshed, more suffering? And is that something we want for Cuba?
Excellent question. I have raised 5 children, and some of them have been very challenging.